In the summer of 1987, I was literally walking past Mary's Bar in Houston, Texas. A friend of mine saw me, ran out of the bar and said, Michael, there's something you have to see here. And he grabbed me and dragged me into the bar. And in the back patio of the bar, there were people with bed sheets and literally a Texas cake pan. And they were painting names on these bed sheets and painting names in their dates of death and their birth dates. They were talking about the people. I could see healing. I could see laughter. They were crying. But they also were talking about that person as a person. And until that point, it was, to me, it was the numbers. The numbers were rolling in and rolling in, and people were dying, and services were happening. And I went, this makes sense. This is something I can understand. I immediately called up my friend. He was a partner survivor of my friend Troy Bud Webb, who passed away, and said, hey, I saw something today that was really impactful, and I think we need to be part of it. So we gathered him and his family, and we made a panel for Troy, and it was his Mardi Gras flag that he had. And his family put notes all on the Mardi Gras flag, and we had letters also put inside the Mardi Gras flag to him. The quilt was first displayed in Washington on the mall. It was the March on Washington, the second march, gay and lesbian march on Washington. And we went for the opening, and it was early in the morning. And people were gathered around these folded up sections of quilt. And they gave us all maps and it told where the panel was going to be that you made. So I was literally standing at the edge of the walkway and very nervous about it because we sent it in and never heard anything. And you know, my friend kept saying, Michael, calm down. It's going to be right here. And I remember bursting in sort of frustration saying, you trust a bunch of homosexuals from San Francisco? But when Troy's panel unfolded in front of me, it was the first time I burst into tears from his death, from the day of his death, through his memorial service. I never cried. I stood there through that being stoic. But I burst into tears, and this older woman reached her arms around me and said to me, my son's next to your friend. And that, to me, told me, we have a memorial. We have a permanent memorial. That woman's son and her and I are all now linked because that's what a memorial is. Well, in 1987, Houston, Texas, it was very polarizing. AIDS, there were initiatives being planned to test people and to find out anyone with AIDS and have them fired. There were even talks of having camps for people with AIDS so that they would not spread AIDS to the general population. There were attacks. I had friends who died of dehydration from diarrhea in their house because they could not get help. There was such prejudice. But on the other side, the people that came together were so strong. And they built a community. And that's what inspired me with the quilt. When I saw those quilts and I saw people talking about and remembering those that had lost their lives, that there was a unity happening and strength. And just like threads, it was just like, you put one thread, you can break it. But when you start binding a bunch of threads together, it gets stronger and stronger. And that was the reason I found a quilt, even before it went to D.C. And I would call up San Francisco and say, "Hi, I'm the guy down in Texas, and I'm going to borrow that quilt." And, one day, they put the phone down, and I heard them, they said, "It's that guy from Texas again, and he wants to borrow the quilt." And Cleve came onto the phone. "You want to do what?" And I said, "I want to borrow that quilt for down here in Houston. And I'm going to bring it to Houston and put it on the stairs of our city hall." And he said, "Hell, we don't even know how we're going to get it to Washington. And you want to borrow. You talk to me later." and that happened. After we went to D.C., and then I was selected to be on part of the 1989 national tour. I got to travel around the country for 6 weeks. And what I learned were that people cared. The anger that I was holding for all those 8, 9 years, not totally dissipated, but their love, their support of the volunteers from all across the country taught me this is the way to go. And the beauty of the quilt just kept growing and growing, along with its size and its impact, and more people being involved. One of the most impactful cities was Birmingham, Alabama. The city where civil rights took place, where people did this. But the quilt was the first AIDS, the first gay initiative that ever came into that city. And when the time for the Candlelight March came, they were, well, I don't know if I want to go out there. We're making excuses because they were afraid to march on the street with candles. And as they marched from the square that they marched from back to the convention center, suddenly every church bell in Birmingham, Alabama, start ringing its bells. What an impact it made. I watched people move from holding a candle close to their chest to raising them high above their heads. And I realized we're part of history. So after returning from the national tour, I continued to be involved as a volunteer, later as a staff member. The most pivotal year for the NAMES Project, the AIDS Memorial Quilt, was 1996. We decided to take the quilt to Washington and show the whole quilt in its entirety. We did that display with over 31,000 volunteers from across the country and actually across the world. There were over 40,000 quilt panels, and it stretched the entire mall of it from the Washington Monument to the steps of the Capitol. Bill Clinton and Hillary were in the White House at that time. It was the first time a president of the United States walked on the quilt. 1996, the AIDS epidemic had been going on for years with such little action on the president's part. Bill Clinton moved forward and immediately got Ryan White legislation passed.